Welcome to UPR Info's tutorial on the modalities of the Universal Periodic Review. This tutorial is aimed at all actors of the UPR process: states, national human rights institutions, non-governmental organizations, media, academics, parliamentarians, UN agencies, etc. The purpose of this tutorial is to explain the different stages of the process, how it was created, when, what are its objectives, and how it works. It is only an introduction to the process and requires further readings. However, it will provide those different actors with all sufficient knowledge to fully engage in the UPR. This tutorial consists of slides presenting different aspects and stages of the UPR and lasts for about half an hour. At the end, a small test will check your understanding of this tutorial. We hope you find it useful, and we encourage you to also look at the two other tutorials we've developed on the role of states under review and NGOs in the process. The Universal Periodic Review is a unique mechanism of the United Nations aiming at improving the human rights situation of the 193 UN member states. The UPR is a full-cycle process comprising of 3 stages.
The review of the human rights situation of the state under review, including the developments since the last review and the implementation of recommendations received at the last review. The implementation by the state under review between 2 reviews, 4.5 years, of the new recommendations and the voluntary pledges and commitments. Reporting at the next review on the implementation of those recommendations and pledges and on the human rights situation in the country since the previous review.
The Universal Periodic Review is a fairly new mechanism and often described as unique by different actors, and this for several reasons that we will now describe to you.
The Universal Periodic Review is firstly universal in terms of the countries under review. All UN member states are concerned by this mechanism and have to discuss their human rights situation in Geneva with other states. During the first cycle, the 192 states participated in the mechanism, which is unprecedented in the United Nations history. The universality is also in terms of human rights. As we will see later, there are certain bases for the review, but in practice, all human rights can be raised on any state under review, from civil and political rights to economic, social, and cultural rights, such as the right to food, the right of indigenous peoples, torture, justice, right to housing, etc. The UPR has allowed, during the first cycle, to draw the attention of the international community to human rights. Each country had to present a report on the human rights situation at home, but also to prepare statements on the situation in other states, thus looking into what was happening in neighboring countries. UN agencies, civil society organizations, and national institutions also provided the Human Rights Council with information about the human rights situations in countries. The webcast of each review enabled to diffuse the Geneva discussion in countries, and numerous medias covered the process. Despite being a process driven by states, civil society organizations have many different ways to participate in the process. The first cycle witnessed the involvement of many grassroots organizations, forming coalitions to provide information and lobby in Geneva, some of them engaging at the international level with the United Nations for the very first time. The UPR is the latest of several human rights mechanisms. Its role is not to replace others, but to complement them. In different ways, the UPR has strengthened them. For example, many recommendations made at the UPR invites states to sign and ratify human rights conventions and treaties, and to submit reports to treaty bodies and invite special procedures mandate holders. Also, there are many recommendations made which actually come from treaty bodies and special procedures, thus reinforcing the outcomes of these mechanisms. The creation of the Universal Periodic Review needs to be put in the context of the reform of the United Nations initiated by Kofi Annan in his report Enlarged Freedom. His aim was to make human rights one of the three pillars of the United Nations, together with security and development. The UPR is the latest of the different human rights mechanisms of the UN. It follows the development of norms in the 60s, then the development of treaty bodies and special procedures in the 70s. Its role is not to duplicate but to complement existing mechanisms and strengthen the implementation of their outcomes at the national level. The UPR was created as a working group to the Human Rights Council, which replaced the Commission on Human Rights in 2006. Many actors were criticizing the Commission for discussing human rights situations in a selective and subjective manner. The UPR, which started in April 2008, was conceived as a response to this criticism to ensure that the human rights situation in all countries could be discussed.
The modalities of the Universal Periodic Review are contained in Human Rights Council Resolution 5/1, adopted on 18 June 2007. This resolution contains notably the obligations to be addressed at the UPR.
The Charter of the United Nations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights instruments to which the state is party. Voluntary pledges and commitments made by the state. Applicable international humanitarian law.